Okay. So everyone sees on your screen we're recording.
Yes.
So officially, good morning to those
Yep.
who are here and those who are watching the recording. Again, to remind everyone of the schedule, the next 2 weeks we will not be meeting. We will begin again on whatever that I don't have the date in front of me in May, 3 weeks from today. And we'll be continuing. This topic, which is of I think certainly a contemporary interest, as we shall see. We are talking about the relationship of Jews and non-Jews, and we'll note that we started with a teshuvah. Let's try to. There we go. This will be the next thing that we're looking at. We started with the teshuvah of Rabbi Kimmelman, and he pointed out. No, I'm sorry, Ruvain Hammer, and he. Wait a second, was it Kimmelman or Hammer? I'll get that right. Um, and he pointed out that the relationship between Jews and non-Jews today is not what it was many, many years ago, and that some of the questions about non-Jews had to do with whether or not Jews were. Yeah, it was Rabbi Hammer, so I just found that. Okay, it was Rabbi Hammer who was pointing out that the relationship between Jews and non-Jews has changed significantly, and we're not living among idolaters. And even in the Middle Ages, it was recognized that those we live amongst are not idolaters. Oops. Is the text up there? Is the screen share up there?
No.
Very small.
Do you see the text?
No.
Can you see a text? Yes, no,
No.
No.
no. Okay, so let's stop the share and we'll start that all over again. And what the Teshuvah said, what we had in the oh that okay. Okay, I'm gonna have to go back. I'm sorry. I occasionally have to be sure that the right texts are open. Uh, okay, now we can share that. What we had was in the Middle Ages, yes, situation where it was recognized that Jews are not living among idolaters. And some of the rules were concerned because when you're dealing with non-Jews who are idolaters, there were a lot of prohibitions. And there were also issues about, in commercial situations, what you do, you can't do because there's some fear that you are in some way either encouraging or supporting idolatry, and those sorts of concerns are no longer really ones that we care about, and that comes from the Middle Ages. Rabbi Hammer was also pointing out that there is some concern today, and in Israel, and we continue to see this, where there was a book written that made it sound as if that, no, I'm sorry, it made it very clear that non-Jews were inferior inherently to Jews. And he was arguing very clearly from the sources that yes, we have in the past both positive and negative views of non-Jews, but that, our sources are clear. God created all of us, and we have to condemn those who would think that somehow non-Jews are an inferior species to Jews. That sort of racial theory should be removed from Judaism, but unfortunately, we do have people in Israel who are promoting it. Okay, so that was one area. Now, the next area that I want to move on to this is a very relevant area, is the question of Jews and non-Jews as far as modern synagogues. These issues, of course, were not being raised in ancient times or in the Middle Ages in the ways that we raise them, but there are some parallels and some rules within Judaism that we have to see how they apply. We know this is happening. One, we're more fully integrated into society than we were in the past. We don't have the type of ghettoization. We have full citizenship rights, and also the issue of intermarriage. So what do we do now? There are a lot of non-Jews who are married to members of our congregation, who even come to services. take the kids to religious school, show up. Not so much here, but certainly when I was in Nashville, there were a lot of non-Jews. It's a fair number who every year I had I think I mentioned this, an introduction to Judaism class. While it was not prime only for people who were interested in conversion, and there were numbers in there, every year there would be a number of non-Jews who were just interested in Judaism, and they would show up for this introductory class to learn something about Judaism. And there were a few every year who would convert. Many more there than here. And we have now questions. Now we have non-Jews amongst us. So some of the questions we're going to look at, we're going to start talking about their role within synagogue services, membership in the synagogue, and also intermarriage. And also we'll get to a recent law that was passed in Israel that that is also treats Jews and non-Jews unequally. But okay, let's start here. Okay, I chose this as a good starting place because it gives you a very interesting perspective on this question. And the question that's being asked here is, can non-Jews lead parts of synagogue services? Now, what's your gut feeling on that? When you hear that, well, what do you think?
I would think not.
You would think not. Is
I would
there
think not.
anything a non-Jew could do at a synagogue service? Rini?
Well, in our shul, we have
Non-Jews
do some English readings.
Rini, we just
I'm
lost your
still muted.
audio.
Wait, hold on.
There is a problem with your audio, and I'm not sure what's going on
Okay,
there on
you
your
can
end,
you
but we
still
cannot
can't.
hear you at this moment.
Okay,
I hear her. I
Still
hear
can't
you.
hear you.
Reedy, can you hear Sima?
Yes, I can
I
hear
hear
you.
you.
Oh, there you go. You're back. Okay.
Okay. In our shul, when we've had mayors and also family members of bar and bat mitzvah, and they do English. They can do an English reading, but not Hebrew. You
Okay.
know,
Well, we've certainly had that in our and we've had non-Jews. There's the prayer for the country. There's the
right,
prayer for peace.
right.
Um, by the way,
I,
is the issue the language the prayer is written in? Is that the major issue here, or is there something else about those prayers that we
I just
say that
want to
non-Jews can lead them?
I want to
Well,
just tell you something about
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
Rabbi Sachs. I'm going to quote him. He says that we all of us believe in the same God. It's just a method of getting there that's different.
Okay. So therefore, right, you need. It's a little hard hearing you. You need to speak a little closer to a
Yeah,
microphone, I think.
Rabbi Sachs said that we and the non-Jew, and I think he was referring to Christians and Muslims, all believe in the same God. The difference is that we have different ways of getting there.
Yeah, that we've often heard. It's some people use the metaphor of a mountain. God is at the top of the mountain, and there are different paths up the mountain. So again, that would allow for the reading of certain prayers.
Right.
Certainly, if you were, by the way, if you were in a synagogue in Israel, with a vernacular is Hebrew, and they had a prayer for peace in Hebrew, right? Would that be the same as reading the prayer for peace in English in an American
yeah,
synagogue?
yeah.
We would generally think yes, okay. Fine. So how did we come about that distinction? How far does that distinction go, and why is there that distinction? So should those like I said, what is the line with that distinction? Because I think many of you know in Reform synagogues, that distinction is not maintained in many Reform synagogues. So there are many non-Jews who do lead certain prayers, ones that we would not allow for, say, in a conservative or Orthodox synagogue. So we want to go back and take a look at some of the reasoning. So why are there certain boundaries, and which boundaries are important, and which boundaries may be flexible? And again, Yes, it is a question. Yes, we have certainly, we might have a distinguished personage in our synagogue, right? If King Charles walked in while into a synagogue while he's here in America, which I think is unlikely, but heaven, would it be nice? Wouldn't that? But anyway, there are certain things that are okay, certain things that are not,
Rabbi,
where did those lines originate, and which ones do we maintain today? So that'll be part of the question. Okay. I took this because I like the way they described it. This is from an organization called Mechon Hadar, the Hadar Institute. Any of you familiar with Hadar? I don't know if any of you are familiar. Okay, okay. It's a center of Jewish life, learning, and practice that builds vibrant, egalitarian communities in North America and Israel. Our vision for Jewish life is rooted in rigorous and nuanced Torah study, gender equality, meaningful Jewish practice, and the values of kindness and compassion. And they have a congregation in Manhattan and a couple of other ones around the country. There's one in Brooklyn, and they're expanding. They run extensive adult education programs. There's a great emphasis on music in their services. If you went to one of their services, you would see there's a lot of singing, a lot of spirit, and a lot of praying in Hebrew. And it's all egalitarian. So that is, and it's become very popular. They're expanding. They publish materials that I find to be very thoughtful and inspiring, and they've captured groups of people who I would say are a little not. Some of whom have a traditional background, some who do not, but Orthodoxy with its gender separation and other strictures is not attractive to them, and they find Hadar very, very attractive, and they're doing extremely, extremely well. And the two people in this discussion, Rabbi Avi Killip, Executive Vice President of Hadar, a graduate of HUC. Okay, she is a Reform rabbi and was a Wexner graduate fellow. Sidebar, yes, that Wexner. There's a big debate now among those. Carol, I'm sure you're more familiar with this, unfortunately, than we are, living where you do. Columbus, Ohio is center of was where Wexner lives, and the center. Extremely philanthropic individual who set up all sorts of ways of encouraging Jewish life, including fellowships, and of course, unfortunately, was with Epstein quite a bit, and that's created some concern, a lot of concern. But anyway, to become a Wexner graduate fellow, that was a very, very selective and important. And when you hear somebody has done that, this is really an important and serious person. Okay. So, and the other person is Rabbi Eitan Tucker, president and Rosh Yeshiva at Hadar. He was ordained by the chief rabbinate of Israel. So that's an Orthodox ordination. Earned a doctorate in Talmud and rabbinics from JTS. Okay. BA from Harvard. Also a Wexner graduate fellow. Okay. And one of the founders. So these are two of the major people in Hadar. So they want to talk about, right? Are there rules that are appropriate for non-Jews to play in services? For example, can they recite the prayer for our country? We've already mentioned that. Could they open up? What about opening the ark? We're going to go into great detail about opening the ark. And what things should we take into consideration when making these decisions? Clearly, in ancient times, you didn't have non-Jews participating in services. You would think, right? But let's take a look at this and really look at the sources. And, he's going to try to say, what kind of non-Jewish person are we dealing with here? A government official, right? What happens when the mayor walks into your synagogue? He's going to give a talk about your city. Neighbors from the community who's stopping in, someone who's on the path to conversion, someone who's civilly married to a Jewish member of the community. Wow, we've got all sorts of different types of non-Jews who are showing up at our services nowadays. So how do we deal with that? That's just,
Rabbi, what
yes.
does the Torah got to say about that?
I'm sorry, say it again. What is
What
it?
does the Torah
Well,
have
we're
to
going to see
say
that.
about people?
We're going to look at some of the sources. Exactly. That's the question. What is the Torah? What is the Talmud? What do the medieval
Right.
scholars say about that? This is what we're going to
Yes.
look at here. So, okay, so you're asking the right question. Let's try to see if we can, we'll find out, I think, that this is a little bit more nuanced than we might have thought. Okay. I mean, I mean, it's very easy to say no, 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 no to everything.
Yeah.
But as you point out, Jack, we need to go back to the sources to take a look at what's going on. Okay. King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, is dedicating the first temple in the first book of Kings. He's going through all the different people who might connect to this new sanctuary, right? Wow. Imagine the first temple. Now we've got a temple in Jerusalem at the time of King Solomon. This is, around 900,000 BCE, 3,000 years ago. Who might pray and offer sacrifices? Remember, when we're talking about the first temple, we're not talking about a place where people went to Friday night services. We're talking about a place that was worshipped through sacrifice, primarily through animal and grain and other types of sacrifices. Okay. And he says, and also the Nochri, the foreigner that is not from the people Israel, comes from a faraway land because he hears all about the amazing things that God has done and wants to pray in this house. Okay. Non-Jew. Wow, this is great God that these people have. And they've just built this beautiful temple. This is an important and spiritually uplifting matter. Even though I'm not Jewish, maybe I should be there and take part in it. Okay. So what is so what happens? That the temple is supposed to be a place that will and ought to draw in people of all backgrounds. You have Beit Tefillah Yikare L'Kol Ha'amim. Does he quote that? I believe that's Isaiah or Psalm. He doesn't give you unfortunately, he doesn't give you the quote there. My house shall be a house of prayer. It will be called a house of prayer for everyone, right? Should be called a house of prayer for all nations. And that's in the Bible itself. Okay. Right? We think about the temple as the most restrictive sort of place. So the image initially, we hear this in the Bible. But there's another side to the coin, or Rabbi Tucker is saying, we'll see in these sources, there's these counter forces. How inclusive are you, and how much do you exclude people? Right?
Rabbi, can I say something?
Sure.
And if you look at the Siddur today, you will not find anything dealing with. You won't find the Ten Commandments in the Siddur. Well, they used to be there, but certain parts of the then Jews said that the only thing they believe in is the Ten Commandments, so they were taken out.
That is correct. We do not. You may. That is absolutely correct. During services, we do not find or recite. You might think we might recite the Ten Commandments. Although I will point out that in almost every synagogue, you will find some visual representation of the Ten Commandments. Many synagogues have them above the ark, on the side wall, in various places. And you're right in that the question was, well, we have now these new groups, the Christians, who are saying, well, you follow the Ten Commandments and you don't have to follow all the other commandments. So we don't want it to make it sound like we as Jews only have 10 commandments. We have a lot more, traditionally. There's, as you know, in the Talmud, it says there are 613. So we want to discourage the idea that this is the only thing that we do. So let's take it out of the liturgy, which they did. Take it out of the synagogue, which they did. Okay. Okay. There's a much more parochial perspective in the book of Eicha. right? Jeremiah is wailing over the loss of the temple and what has happened. He says that Jerusalem witnessed nations coming into her sanctuary, about whom it was commanded they should never come into the community or holy space. In other words, Jeremiah, who literally saw the destruction of the temple, said, look at all these people who are coming in here. They should not be here, right? Of the temple as a Jewish building par excellence, restricted to God's people and God's relations with the Jewish people, right? And one of the horrific dimensions of its destruction was people just kind of walking in who are not part of it, that it's an exclusive space for Jews. Okay. And you have the kind of practical consequences in the book of Ezra. Okay, so now the book of Ezra talks about the exiles.
You ran at me. You're not speaking to me.
Hello?
Speaking to you, but I can't do it right now.
Somebody is talking, needs to mute. Okay. So you have the book of Ezra. The exiles return. They're going to build the second temple and a bunch of Samaritans. Now, Samaritans living in the land of Israel, not really any longer part of the Jewish people. They had started as Jewish people, but they separated off at a very early time. They're separated at the time of Ezra, which is going back 2,500 years or so. And by the way, and there still are some Samaritans living in Israel today. They seem to have some sort of non-Israel allies, and they want to contribute to building the second temple. Will you take our donations? Right? Here's an organization. Excuse me. Again, the allergies are bothering me. That needs funding, and they want to contribute. And we have one of the in the sources, Lo lachem velanu livnot bayit leEloheinu. It is not a joint project. We're building the second temple. This is a Jewish space. The parochial idea, the temple, everyone agrees that only the priests who perform this type of work, do that. So the real question is, how do the universal and the parochial play off one another? And what's the kind of balance that emerges out of them in terms of practice? So he's also saying already in the Bible, we have different strands. We have very clear strands that the temple at one point is a place for all peoples, but we also have a very parochial idea that it's only for Jews. Okay. So there are other sources in the book of Leviticus. It is forbidden for Gentiles to bring sacrifices to the temple that have some kind of blemish, that have something wrong with the animal that it makes it unfit. As Rabbi Tucker is pointing out, it assumes that Gentiles can bring sacrifices, right? In other words, Gentiles, this is really the great place to show respect and worship to God. Even though we're not Jews, we want to show respect and worship to God, so we're going to bring a sacrifice. So the book of Leviticus, biblical, already notes that that's happening, but does place some restrictions on it. Okay. Yeah, and what does it mean that a non-Jew can bring a sacrifice? That non-Jews participate in the worship. And there he says you have a debate between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Okay. So there we see that in ancient times you have two rabbis, one more inclusive and one exclusive. Okay. Okay. In other words, when you think about basically operating expenses of the temple, bringing sacrifices which are supporting the temple, you would say Gentiles can be full members of the prayer and worship communities, controlling for requirements of obligation and performance. Okay. So there is some allowance here for non-Jews, but there is some restriction. To lead something, you need to be obligated. Now, this is a very significant point. Who can lead a synagogue service? Right. We know that. Why is it that at age 13, the age of bar mitzvah, a young Jewish person can lead the services. What changes? What's the difference between, say, a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old? And the 13-year-old can lead the service and the 12-year-old cannot. Why?
Just the tradition of bar mitzvah, making 13 the age
Of what?
of maturity, which they're not, but
No, that's certainly, if it's maturity, well, that varies tremendously from child to child. And is it a question that you have to be mature? What is it that you have to be in order to lead services in front of the congregation?
A Jewish adult?
What a Jewish and what is it about a Jewish adult that makes them qualified to lead services?
the Jewish.
I'm thinking the assumption that they have a certain amount of Jewish learning. Maybe that was the assumption then.
Yeah, but that's certainly not, as we know, that does, a 13-year-old with no Jewish learning whatsoever can lead services, and a 12-year-old who went to yeshiva all his life cannot. But you're right, that was an assumption in ancient times, but even that doesn't stand up. The issue is that when you become an adult, you now have obligations, right? There are different rules that apply to you that didn't apply when you were not an adult. By the way, in American law, why are certain people tried as juveniles? We apply the law differently to people of different ages, right? You hear this, oh, this person was a teenager under the age of 18, but we're going to try him as an adult, right? You ever hear that? The question here is what is the relationship between that person and the laws? The assumption in Jewish law is that when you become a bar or bat mitzvah, you now are under the obligations of observing Jewish law. If you're under the age of 13, do you have to fast on Yom Kippur?
I think not.
No, you don't. Now, people will say, okay, when you get to 11, 12, you should start fasting a little bit during the day so you get used to it. As you're a 12-year-old, you're under no obligation to fast. But when you become bar bat mitzvah, you're now under the obligation that you must fast, except for certain exceptions, on Yom Kippur. Okay, but those obligations of Jewish law, which apply to a bar or a bat mitzvah, include those obligations to pray. It's the obligation to keep kosher, to wave your etrog and lulav. We could go on and on. To be honest in business, not to lie, not to gossip, to keep Shabbat. But one of them is that you're obligated to pray. I'm obligated to pray since I'm, let's say, to a person. You're obligated to pray. You're over the age of 13. So when you lead the service, you are saying the prayers for a group of people, and that group of people are all under the obligation to pray, and you satisfy everyone's obligation to pray because you too have that obligation. Okay, is that clear? All right. So now we're starting to deal with this question of the difference between Jews and non-Jews, with the question of what sort of obligations and requirements are there for people to do certain things within the service. Okay, right? To lead something, you need to be obligated in that ritual in order to fulfill the obligations of others in the community. So someone who's not Jewish and not part of the community wouldn't be able to do that because they don't have that obligation to pray, the obligatory, and there's certain obligatory prayers, which is why we say the prayer for the country.
Wait a minute. Don't they have the Noach laws?
There's no question. That doesn't mean that non-Jews can do anything. You're absolutely correct.
It's something
there are rules that, according to Jewish tradition, are applicable to all people to be moral people, right? The Noahite, the laws, B'nai Noach. Noah was not Jewish. The first Jew is Abraham, and Noah lives way before Abraham. So there are rules that are derived that are obligatory on all humanity. That's true. But praying the Amida at Shacharit is not one of them. Okay. Not murdering, being kind to animals, setting up rules of justice. There are 7 of them. But the particular rules of prayer in the synagogue are only applicable to Jews over the age of bar or bat mitzvah. Okay. You're counting in a minion, right? We need 10. Okay, there are a couple of sources that say if you have 9 and you have a person who's under the age of bar mitzvah, you give them a chumash to hold, and they're holding the chumash, and they're 12 years old. That's number 10. That there are those who hold that. Okay, but generally, again, who counts in them?
He said that.
I'm sorry, Carol. What? I'm sorry, Carol. What did you say? You're muted. We cannot hear you. Okay. All right, and so
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
I was just quoting Maimonides.
Oh, okay, Maimonides said that. Yeah. Okay. So we know that there's a long time tradition. You mean they had trouble getting a minion in the Maimonides times? Oh no, I guess so. I mean, to me, that's an indication that it's not so easy to get people together twice a day to pray. All right. So now, this is a question of obligation. But I would dare suggest that according to the model of Rabbi Ishmael, who was more inclusive, you might even be able to imagine someone, this is very cleverly, carefully worded, who was not Jewish, who was competent in the language of prayer, getting up and leading something like Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat. What a new invention. It's a couple 100 years old, 400 or 500 years old. That's really new. And when the system of obligations for prayer were specifically set up in the Talmudic period, they didn't have Kabbalat Shabbat, right? The story is in Sfat, in the city in northern Israel, in the hills, they would go out on Friday night, and as the sun was setting, they would sing these songs and gather and sing some psalms, and that way they would begin to receive Shabbat, right? So theoretically, he is saying, if we have just the idea of obligation versus non-obligation, what do you do with something like Kabbalat Shabbat? How would you, what arguments might you make that non-Jews could not lead Kabbalat Shabbat? What would be the arguments against it?
They're not obligated to observe Shabbat.
Yeah, but they're not obligated to about the prayers. There's no obligation to say Kabbalah. Is Kabbalat Shabbat connected to the obligation of Shabbat? Oh, okay. You say maybe. Well, maybe that's a somewhat of a connection. Okay. Any other reasons you might argue against a non-Jew getting up and, hey, you're in your synagogue. Somebody gets up who everybody knows is not Jewish and starts leading Kabbalat Shabbat. What do you start thinking?
Maybe they're talking about Sunday.
I don't know what's going on here, right? In other words, you start thinking to yourself, this seems strange. Maybe I can figure out some reason why this is happening. Because it doesn't seem to be happening the normal way, right? Okay.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to have wine that's not mevushal served by a non-Jew?
Okay, you're getting to another question, which has to do with serving wine. And there was some concern in traditional, which continues in the Orthodox world, of whether or not the wine has been at some point involved in idolatrous practices, which in ancient times was a real concern. to be sure that, and one way of doing it so that you, even if it had been, you can sort of purify it, is by
I wonder if there's
eating it.
any relation to what we're talking about.
Oh, is it in relation? Again, it isn't, it is related in the idea, again, of Jews and non-Jews having different obligations, right? You want, and that has a lot to do with this question of non-Jews. Are you concerned that wine in its production at some point might have been involved in idolatrous practice? Again,
Right.
real concern in ancient times. Personally, I will say that the conservative movement has said just to drink a glass of wine sometime with dinner or at a bar, it doesn't have to be kosher. However, at Jewish events, in the synagogue, at simchas, it needs to be kosher. So there we've made a distinction, right? Between why, and that's because of sociological difference in which we don't consider those non-Jews who are handling the wine to have been using it for idolatrous purposes, right? But that's just not we are saying that we don't consider that to be a significant factor. But interestingly enough, for wine that we have at simchas and in the synagogue, let's be extra sure and be sure it's kosher. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So now let's go back to Kabbalat Shabbat. So those of you who have been to Jerusalem and may have worshipped at a place called Shira Chadasha, it's a very traditional service, but the mechitza runs down the middle of the room, literally right through the reader's table. And if you go there on Friday nights, it is very well attended. Get there early if you want a seat. And women lead Kabbalat Shabbat. But other than that, it's run on Orthodox lines. How can they allow women to lead Kabbalat Shabbat? From what you've read here, women traditionally are not under the obligation to pray 3 times a day. Since they don't have that obligation, they can't fulfill that obligation for the people in the service. But there's no obligation on Kabbalat Shabbat. Since there's no obligation to say Kabbalat Shabbat, the person who's leading the service is not under that obligation. And therefore, even in a traditional Orthodox setting, one could argue that therefore a woman could. Now, there are other issues as well, the voice of a woman, but without getting into all of those other issues, but that is why you will see that at that synagogue, and that has become a practice through many synagogues, through many traditional synagogues throughout the world, where Kabbalat Shabbat is actually led by a woman. Okay, so that's the. But notice they're pushing this here. Well, what about a non-Jew? Would there seem to be, like I said, there might be we might feel uncomfortable or feel there's something not right about the non-Jew leading Kabbalat Shabbat. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so here we're seeing, and we'll see this even further in some of the other sources, is that question of, are we just talking about strictly Jewish law, or are there other reasons that, because we're strictly talking about Jewish law, the non-Jew could lead Kabbalat Shabbat? But I think all of us would say, it just doesn't sit right with me. There's something else that is disturbing. Okay. Right? And as is pointed out here, even in the ancient times where you have the difference between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, some who, one who was lenient and one who was strict, the one who was strict would certainly say that. In Rabbi Akiva's school, oops, let me get my cursor, there it is, extends saying all communal obligations offered in the temple have to be brought only by Jews. Okay? And that's something that is statutory, required, part of the core operations, that must come from Jews alone. So, the question is, are we saying Kabbalat Shabbat? Okay, it's new. They invented it 300 years ago. You don't even have to say it. But is it part of the core of what we are doing so that it has taken on that role of being something only for Jews? But notice, again, that argument is outside of the argument as to whether or not there's an obligation to say Kabbalat Shabbat. Everyone agrees there is no obligation to say it. But even though it's not required, maybe it's just not right. Okay. So he points out, again, this question how liberal one might be. In the Talmud Yerushalmi, there's an example of a menorah in a synagogue that bore the name of the Gentile who donated it. Right? How many objects in your synagogue have names of non-Jews who donated it? And in the sense sort of giving free will offerings to a synagogue is fine. When you have a capital campaign, some non-Jew wants to make a donation, get their name on the wall. Would you allow that? Would that seem the right thing to do? It's a question, right? If you want an example from ancient times, guess what? They did. And the overall framework of this, which becomes much more dominant, would be thinking about what are the essential pieces of the service. Here he's really hitting it. What's essential? Not just what is halakhically prohibited or forbidden, but let's talk about essences rather than legal requirements. Okay. As opposed to additions or edited reading. Kabbalat Shabbat. To the extent that that's become a statutory part of prayer experience. Go to any conservative or Orthodox synagogue, it's Friday night. Guess what? They're doing Kabbalat Shabbat. Go into a Reform synagogue on Friday night. I assure you they will be singing Lecha Dodi, at least in some version. Maybe not the whole thing, but they're going to sing Lecha Dodi, right? And they may even sing a couple of Psalms, maybe not all the Psalms, but they will certainly be doing that. Turn on Central Synagogue on your computer or on your TV on Friday night. They're singing Lecha Dodi and they're singing Psalms. Even if it's not something where you're fulfilling an obligation or doing it for someone else, it's part of what a synagogue, a shul, expects itself to do. It doesn't treat itself as optional. A new rabbi comes to town that says, Kabbalat Shabbat isn't required. We're not going to do it anymore. That would not be a popular position in most shul synagogues that I am aware of, okay? Then someone Jewish needs to be leading that in this model, okay? So now we're starting to see, are there some distinctions we can make? The liminal things would be the things at, on the edges between two things. Is this questioner asks, pray for the government. Opening the ark. We're going to look at this in great detail, obviously, in my next class. Is it a Jewish obligation to open the ark? If it doesn't matter, but here's the second question. If it is or it isn't, that really doesn't matter because it is so essentially a part of the service that it is really something only Jews can do. But is it an obligatory part of the service? Is there an absolute requirement that just as you must pray the Amidah, you need to have someone who is under Jewish obligations to open the ark? Yes or no? And we'll see two opposing views about that. Right? Well, the prayer for the government is really just an expression of people who are citizens of, the United States or wherever they live. Okay? Opening the ark, there's no technical obligation involved. Okay, it's not a chiyuv, as we say in Hebrew, or an obligation. If there's someone who's not Jewish who wants to come and honor the Torah in that way, Why is that any different from King Solomon's non-Jew, Gentile, who comes in order to pay homage to God? Okay, that's the question. Well, again, next time we'll look at it in detail. Okay. We don't think of the prayer for the government or the opening of the ark as optional, right? No, we do that. We want the Jewish community to do it. Okay. And he says, you might really depend on what is the reason for the question being asked. Why are we even asking this question as to having non-Jews do these things? What's the point? Why is this question being asked? They didn't ask it in ancient times, right? They didn't ask it during the Middle Ages. What kind of effect will it have on that person? The right question to be mediating on is which pieces of the service, where we're saying whether or not anyone is coming voluntarily to kind of be part of the service. This is something that the Jewish community has a responsibility to do, and those things need to be focused on the Jewish core, as opposed to which pieces can we imagine essentially being kind of sitting around that core, even potentially in a very important way. But that potentiality we can see is more analogous to the free will offerings and the free praise that are already talked about in the earlier sources. In other words, these things that are sort of in between, where do we put them? Do we put them in the place where we had, these non-Jews who were offering sacrifices in ancient times in the temple? Or do we say that they're now an essential part of the service, so they go into this other bucket? Okay. The universalist piece is a powerful, the kind of grounding what the point of these institutions are, which on some level is to increase the knowledge of God. Are they really very basic questions as to who we are and what the Jewish tradition brings to the world? And on the other hand, powerful institutions are in part anchored by a sense that you get to be a part of them because you are really kind of all in and part of the covenantal framework that they're sustaining. Right. In other words, here again, we have that polarity. Is it because we're a solid institution that believes in this, or are we a type of institution that is having other values by bringing other people in? And the fact is that you can't entirely maximize both of these at the same time. Exclusive, inclusive. Which is it? Can't do both. And that is what I think is interesting about the attempts to find some kinds of rules for balancing them in some way. Okay. Comments or questions about what we've seen so far?
My question, Rabbi, is whether all of this material was available for us to download?
Okay.
I never saw it.
Okay, I will tell you, I may not have sent this out. Let me double check. Okay. I have to tell you, because I'm going on this trip on Thursday, I was a bit busy and did not
I'm sorry.
check that. No, you're right. Let me see what I sent out. Let me see. Actually, I see this. This is source number. I don't know. I'll double check, and if I may resend some. Okay. I'll check that.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Yeah, I found this and I thought this was really a nice description because it's by people who are both soundly traditional and also soundly modern. They're not coming at this from either a totally Orthodox perspective, although one of them has Orthodox, but both are, one studied at JTS, the other studied at HUC, and they're part of this institution, Hadar, which is in a way mixing, trying to find a modern path. Jack, do you have a question? Is that your hand up, Jack? Do you have a comment? You're on mute. You have to unmute. Jack, we can't hear you. Somehow you have to unmute. Try holding down the space bar. That sometimes works, depending upon your computer in the program you're on. I'm sorry, Jack, we really can't hear you right now. Jack, we can't hear you. Okay, any other, Jack, usually don't you have somebody helping you there who might be able to show you what to do? Okay, anyone else? So far, any other comments as to where we are right now? Yeah, Rini.
For me, it's I know that the idea is obligation that you're talking about, but for me, I'm perfectly okay with somebody, reading an English reading about a prayer for our country and so on. But opening the ark, even if it's not an obligation, our Torah scrolls are in there, and it just seems that it's a Jewish thing to be that close to the ark and the Torah scroll. It's gut. It has nothing to do with the, knowledge. And have become more um, liberal in certain things as I've gotten older and so on. But I think that there are certain things that just have to be Jewish obligations, even if they're not itemized. I mean, opening the ark is a part of a service. It's not something extra like a prayer for our country or blessing your child at a bar mitzvah. We used to belong to a shul where the rabbi wouldn't let a non-Jewish parent on the bima to bless their child at a bar mitzvah. I disagree with that, but that's not a part of the service.
Okay.
So,
By the way, you've added something there. Can a non-Jew step up to the bima, step on the bima, right? You just added another question as to is that part of the obligatory? And you've also talked about, how, yeah, on the one hand, it's opening the ark is not obligatory, but you'd somehow feel uncomfortable if non-Jews were doing that. Okay, well, we're going to look at the conservative movement's official positions on that next time. Simo, did you have your hand up?
Sort of. I was just
Okay.
wondering for you, Rabbi, being that you got your smicha so many years ago, did they even address this? Like, so
No.
different. So, oh, let's shoot.
I
It's so,
graduated from
it's
JTS
so,
in 1978. That's almost 50 years
I'm
ago.
sorry, it's a doctor's office. I'm
That's okay. That's okay. Okay? Now, someone was asking, did we deal with this in rabbinical school? And the answer is clear. No. This was 50 years ago, practically. 50 years ago, these issues were not as common. Intermarriage was not as common. Um, they just this didn't come up uh, in the early years of my rabbinate. It was only in more recent years within the conservative movement that we do have this question. I would say more commonly outside of the New York City area. Um, Intermarriage is a little less common in the New York City area. Why? Because there are a lot more Jews around. I mean, I'm not going to say it's anything else. But once you get out of the New York City area, you find and many people in the New York City area surprised at the number. As a matter of fact, I think it's the majority of conservative and Reform Jews who marry non-Jews at this point. So these issues did not come up until I was in Nashville. And both in Nashville and in Fair Lawn, um, I have to say, I had to think about exactly we'll get to what my rules were.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Jack, we got you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, what is Kabbalah Shabbat?
What is Kabbalat Shabbat? All right.
Yeah.
On Friday night, we have an evening service, just as we have an evening service every night during the year. And on Friday night, the regular evening service is a little bit differently phrased because it's the beginning of Shabbat, special prayers for Shabbat. Starting several hundred years ago, in the early 17th century, I don't remember the date exactly, a couple hundred years ago, in the city of Sfat, in Israel. It's a high mountain. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. You go out, you see it. You're on a mountain. You can see for miles. A group of mystics, before they said the obligatory evening service for the beginning of Shabbat, to get themselves into the mood, they would go out to the fields and sing psalms and sing songs, and that helped them get them into the mood. And it was called, welcoming or receiving Shabbat. That's what the word Kabbalat Shabbat means. In other words, it's that service that we say before the official evening service, which includes Lecha Dodi, right? Everybody knows Lecha Dodi, right? Well, Lecha Dodi, again, it's a modern.
Yeah.
It's not in the Talmud. It's not in the Bible. They wrote it in at that with those mystics. So now every single synagogue in the world, pretty much, will start when they have their Friday night service with not just the Ma'ariv, the evening service, but with the Kabbalat Shabbat. This new thing that has become so entrenched that everybody knows it, everybody does it. But even though it's a new thing that doesn't carry the weight of the required thing, it's really become something that distinguishes Friday night services. Okay, is that clear? Jack, is that clear?
Oh, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize it's this new invention. Okay. Any other comments? So where are we? Just to summarize on our last minute or two. We've seen that, yeah, even in ancient times that there was some a level of welcoming non-Jews to worship in the temple. But clearly we have two factors, some more inclusive, some less so. And we also have the factor of obligation versus not obligation. But we also have the factor of, well, even if it isn't an obligation, are there other reasons that we may say yes, excuse me, and other reasons that we may say no? And we'll next time, in 3 weeks, we'll take a look at two teshuvot, two opinions from the conservative movement, specifically dealing in that liminal area, opening the ark, which again is not part of the obligatory service like Kabbalat Shabbat. But does it somehow seem right, or does it somehow seem wrong to allow a non-Jew to do that? And we'll read about that debate in some detail next time. Okay.
Thank you. Have a wonderful trip, a safe
Thank
trip.
you.
Enjoy. Nasiya Tova.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
where are you going, Rabbi?
We're going to Spain.
Oh,
Have a good trip.
Have a
When
good trip.
is the next class?
3 weeks from today. Next 2
Oh,
weeks, we're not
thank
meeting
you very much.
the next 2
Have a
weeks.
good trip. Be
Thank
well.
you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. We'll see you
You too.
in 3
Bye.